And what's going on, everybody? This is Vinny Maletti with the Maletti Law, the strongest name in law. The day now is September 29th, 2021. This video is very simple video. Just give you a quick walkthrough on what people are actually looking for when they're going to their doctor and asking for a medical exemption. As you all know, that there is a medical exemption to the vaccine. Basically anything when it comes to anything under the Disability Act, the ADA, anything under civil rights actions. So the way it works is, let's say they do their mandate. Obviously, you're saying, hey, I can't take this vaccine because of X, or, because of this situation, because of that situation. And while most doctors don't want to sign on to anything and they don't want to, put their name on any paper, they're, at a bare minimum, they're gonna have to fill out some kind of paperwork. They're gonna have to fill out some kind of form, some kind of doctor's notice to support your situation, right? So you need a medical professional, your standard medical professional, to provide this information for your employer so they can evaluate whether or not you're entitled to a medical exemption. The law permits medical exemptions. Even recently, with the way the mandates were working, the governor had pulled back one of the mandates and pushed forth another mandate in its place that just wrote a line that said something like, these mandates are subject to all reasonable restrictions under the law, all reasonable requirements under the law. That is kind of like kind of like an alternative way to say that, exemptions are permissible. What you're finding, okay, take a step back for just 1 second, just so it's clear, because I'm talking a lot now. You have the mandate. The mandate comes out and says, if you have a medical exemption, you don't have to take the vaccine. But what does it mean to have a medical exemption, right? So how does that work? So generally speaking, the way the law works is you have to disclose that to your employer, have the conversation. The employer has to have the interactive dialogue with you to understand which situation is. The employer is going to say, okay, well, what is your supporting evidence that you have this medical issue, that you need a medical exemption granted? That's part of the interactive dialogue. And then between you two and your medical provider, you're supposed to come up with some kind of reasonable accommodation that could help you do the essential job functions so long as you have that exemption. So in other words, you need to be able to do all the essential job functions, and they need to grant that accommodation so you could do so, because that restriction is stopping you from doing your essential job functions, right? So a perfect example is, let's say you were in a warehouse and suddenly you were, I don't know, let's just say suddenly you were crippled, right? Like you were driving and you tore your leg apart. You're in the warehouse, you tore your leg apart, but your job, an essential function of your job is, stacking boxes. So in order for you to be able to continue that job, you need some kind of accommodation in order for you to do your essential functions of your job, which is to stack boxes. If it's too difficult for the employer, it's called an undue hardship, and they don't have to do it. But before we even get there, we have to talk about all the stuff underlying, what's the situation, what's the medical hardship that you have, and how does that intertwined with your job function, and what accommodations you need in order to make it happen. So here we are with the vaccine, okay? Now, Sally is a nurse. Sally says, I shouldn't be getting this vaccine because, I need a medical exemption. Well, what's a medical exemption? So Sally needs to go to her doctor, and Sally's doctor, Mary needs to provide a letter. So Mary's going to write some kind of doctor's recommendation letter. But okay, understand what we're looking for here. So your employer may not have this very in-depth disability-related inquiry of you. So they just have to ask general questions to understand what the situation is, understand why you need the exemption, understand why you're claiming a medical exemption is necessary. This is what they need. So they can't ask you, what's your, how'd this happen? How'd you get here? Do you have a history of this use, that use, or whatever the case is? Whatever, right? They can't ask you all those questions. It's just straightforward. Like, your doctor gives a letter. The letter is somewhat specific. The doctor gives a letter to Sally. It's somewhat specific. The employee looks at it and makes a determination, right? So what does that look like? Because what I'm seeing with all these nurses and all these registered nurses and everything, what I'm seeing is that the letter you're getting from your doctors are really weak, really, really, really weak. And I understand the doctors don't want to write nothing, and I get it. So there needs to be clarification on what is like the bare minimum you need to provide, right? Like there is a bare minimum. You know, historically in the legal analysis, you see this all the time. It comes up in the ADA, the FMLA, everything like this. So when you kind of go through the literature, you start noticing that there's a couple things, you know, that every disclosure needs, right? So for instance, perfect example is obviously, you know, you as the employee need to have your employee information and employer information, right? So your employer information. So let's just say your employer information. Who's your employer? What's their name? Who's the contact? What's your job title? What's your regular schedule? What are your essential job functions? That is critical. Your employer, you know, either you fill out the form, or your employer fills out the form, or whatever it provides that data, fills out that data. Someone must disclose what are your essential job functions and how those essential job functions impaired by whatever situation you're dealing with at this point in time. Okay, so now you have your job, what you do, and its essential job functions. How does your situation hamper those essential job functions? Okay, so what is it about your particular situation, your particular medical situation that hurts those job functions? Okay, so now you're not going to go into all that detail in the letter. So now we did the employer stuff, so now you're going to provide who's your healthcare provider information. So this is going to be part 2. Your healthcare, who's the provider, what's the address, what's the type of practice, medical specialty that they have, what's their telephone number, what's their fax number, what's their email. That's the second part, okay, the healthcare information. The third part's going to be the medical information. You know, for instance, you know, what's the start date of your condition? What's the end date of your condition? You know, how long do you think the condition is going to last? There are certain things from a legal perspective that, how can I put it? They're kind of like pre-approved disabilities or situations in which you would look for a medical exemption. You know, that has to do with, like, you know, inpatient care, being partially incapacitated, maybe incapacitated plus some long-term treatment. Pregnancy, though pregnancy itself is not a disability, if you have a compromised pregnancy or you have some kind of pregnancy-related risk, you know, you got gestational diabetes, you have preeclampsia, I'm getting better. You have that kind of stuff, you know? So those are issues. What about chronic conditions? What if you have some kind of chronic conditions, long-term chronic conditions, breathing problems, you know, really bad asthma, you know, whatever the case is. You're allergic. Maybe you're allergic to some of the compounds that are in a vaccine or whatever the case is, right? What kind of permanent long-term conditions do you have? Terminal stages of cancer. What about conditions requiring additional treatments that might conflict with it? What if you're on chemo? You probably don't want to take this if you're on chemo, right? Because you're already immunocompromised. Being immunocompromised, that's another thing. I mean, what if you suffer from some kind of HIV or something, whatever the case is like this, and you don't want to take this thing because you don't want to put the stress on your body, you know? These things are all realistic. There are certain kind of like, you could kind of look at these as like pre-approved conditions, as crazy as it sounds. You kind of look at these as pre-approved, but that's going to be your third part. Your third part's going to be disclosing your medical information. Remember, you're not disclosing that much. You're not disclosing the whole history. You're disclosing what the condition is that you have, how long you're going to have this condition, you know, when it starts, when you expect it to end, what's your best guess estimate on it, and, you know, nothing more than that, okay? Going down the list, you know, now you have the amount of time needed for the accommodation. Do you need leave? Do you need to work remotely? Do you need to be on pregnancy leave? Do you need to be on do you need a reduced schedule? Do you need a completely alternative schedule? Do you need what do you need? And as terms of timing and scheduling or whatever the case is, what do you need in that aspect that could possibly accommodate you? Like perhaps that's what you need. Perhaps, let's say, you know, a reasonable accommodation to not getting the vaccine is working an overnight shift where you're a janitor, you're by yourself, you're not near people, you're socially distanced, right? Maybe that's a fantastic accommodation. And it sounds like a fantastic accommodation. It's just people are batshit stupid this time around, but it's a great accommodation, right? So something like that. I believe that's number 5 on the list. Number 6, you know, going back again, Now we're going back. Now we're going to tie into the beginning. Now we're going to talk about again about your essential job functions, but now we're going to specify, due to this particular condition, you are or are not able to specify these essential job functions, and tell me why. Give me some connect now. At this point, you're connecting your condition with the essential job functions where the problem lies, right? So your condition, you're immunocompromised, right? Whatever, you have HIV or you have some kind of other immune deficiency to where you're going to have a problem. Your condition, you are not able to perform your essential job functions. They're saying, the hospital would be saying being vaccinated to keep everybody safe is an essential function of this job. We need to keep everybody safe. Whatever the case is, you couldn't, or let's just say, let's make it a little more relevant. Let's say being on site is an essential job function, and you cannot be on site without a vaccination. What kind of a reasonable accommodation do you need? Okay, being on site without a vaccination, but what if you don't have COVID? Because, right, the medical condition is being sick. So maybe biweekly testing, whatever the case is, but due to your condition right now, you can't be vaccinated, therefore you can't be on site. So as that moves on, I'm sorry, I thought somebody was knocking. So as that move, as we go down the analysis, the point is that due to your medical condition, you cannot comply with this vaccination. And if being vaccinated is the only way you can be in the place, and let's say being physically present is an essential job function, then you need an accommodation in order to get there. Otherwise, they can't accommodate you. It's due to an undue hardship. Employer has to prove it, and it becomes a big mess. But employers must provide you with a reasonable accommodation. The law is out there. The law says that they must provide you reasonable accommodation. As a result of the temporary restraining order that was, I think, ordered on like the 14th of September, on the 15th or 16th, whatever that day was, the next day, the city added a line to that provision, to that executive order, extending it to civil rights. So don't be fooled. Don't be swayed. You have rights to do this and push it. But the point of this video is really just to introduce to you kind of like what you need to have what does a true medical exemption letter of recommendation look like, a true form look like. Again, just to give it a quick rundown, what does a true form look like? It mentions in the first part, it will mention your employer, the employee, and the essential job functions. So that's the first part. It'll give you the employee, employer, and essential job function information. In the second part, you will disclose who your primary care physician, your healthcare provider is. In the third part, you're going to disclose your medical information. What is it specifically that you're going through right now that gives rise to this? And what does that look like? 4, how long you're going to have this condition, how long you're going to need this accommodation, whatever the case is, you can start talking about the timeliness of it. And then 5, you're going to start talking about we're going to talk about the essential job. But did I say 6 before? I don't know. I'll go through it. I got to write this all down. And then 5, you start talking about the essential job functions, how your condition affects your essential job functions and how you can maintain that balance, what your recommendations are to maintain that balance. And that's what a true medical exemption letter is going to look like. It's going to look like that level of specificity, but at the same time, not so specific to where you disclose your confidential private information, because at the end of the day, your information still needs to be private. There are many causes of action for people that disclose improperly their confidential medical information. And no, it is not HIPAA. Employees do not have to maintain HIPAA. Stop with the HIPAA on employees. It's not HIPAA. There are many other provisions out there. There are provisions from the ADA. There are provisions from other, protection from, protection from privacy and seclusion or something to that effect. There are tort law. There's many other provisions you could cite to. It is not HIPAA. HIPAA is not your employer. HIPAA is going to be against your medical provider, and HIPAA is that your medical provider is not going to improperly disclose this information to anybody, including your employer, but that's not against your employer. Your employer has other standards required in order to maintain confidentiality and employee privacy and medical privacy. So that's my little video right now. My little video now is just on, I guess we'll call it maybe like best practices or so. I'll come up with a crafty name. I'm going to say maybe, I don't know, we'll call it like maybe like the 5 points to a model exemption, the 5 points to a medical exemption letter. I'll come up with something cool like that. But the point is, that's where we are. Milady Law here to help. If you have any questions, concerns, obviously you know where to reach us out to. You can leave your comments in the below. I will try to do the best I can do to give little comments on this back and forth. I love making these little videos. I think they're very helpful. I enjoy speaking to all of you. And I always forget to say this in the front, but if you have haven't subscribed, subscribe already. If you haven't subscribed to the newsletter, subscribe to the newsletter already. Stop playing games, people. I get banned every day. Every day. At some point, you're not going to have me because I'm going to get banned, and you got to find a way to get to me. And you're going to be very upset that you didn't subscribe to my YouTube channel, that you didn't sign up to my newsletter, that you didn't take my cell phone number, you didn't get my WhatsApp information. Someday you're going to be very upset. All right? And when that day comes, you're going to wish you had me. Okay? So sign up to the newsletter, subscribe to the YouTube channel, get on my radar. And obviously, if you have any questions, concerns, anything, you know where we are. Always live without fear, live unafraid, unvaxxed, unmasked, unrelentless, unfuckwittable, and unapologetic. Yours and Law's love and lifts, and we're out. Peace.